Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the presentation, Installation Best Practices, brought to you by AEE Solar. We apologize for the delayed start here. We had a bit of technical difficulties, which brings me to my next note. Before we begin, if you do have any technical difficulties, please notify me by typing in your question in the question pane of your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and go ahead and click send. We will have a question and answer session following the presentation. You're welcome to submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and we will do our best to answer as many possible questions after the webinar. There will be a brief survey that will pop up in a new window immediately following the webinar. If you could please take a couple of minutes to complete it, and we will email you a copy of the presentation. If there's no questions, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter today, Danny Heidowitz with Sunrun. Danny, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation on over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Caitlin. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this Friday morning or afternoon if you're out east. What I'd like to do today is take a quick overview about the Sunrun, kind of our approach and attitude towards design and installation materials and processes, and maybe some additional pointers about quality review best practices. So essentially, we're going to start out and we'll cover a few items. Basically, simple designs are really the way that we operate efficiently and effectively. We have a limited bag of equipment that we pick from, and we're really careful to manage our installation workday and keep it efficient and effective. That's how we get those one-day installations at most job sites. I'll take a moment and talk about site prep and installation. And finally, just a quick review about quality and how we look at actual installations that we audit after the fact. And finally, questions. So simply, our goals is to maintain a profitable solar company, keep it productive, and let us all stay in business and grow for the years to come. So one of the things that we do at Sunrun is we typically try to focus on reduced complexity, and we try to avoid job sites that are just too difficult to manage and can cause basically design and installation challenges over the lifetime of the system. And often these result in more reliable, higher performance systems. So one of the big things that we typically do is we try to avoid those array islands. That's where you just have a module here or there. We find that those often get moved around at actual installation time, and also that one or two modules consumes a whole lot more equipment, materials, and labor. So if at all possible, you want to avoid that sort of thing. And other than that, that's probably the main item that we do to keep simple and effective designs. We typically look at things also from an electrical point of view and try to keep those simpler as well. We service your standard 240 volt service sites only, whereas some other companies may choose to pursue three-phase electrical on farms or other details that cause challenges when it comes to metering and monitoring. So I guess it's similar to what I just talked about a moment ago, but it's worth highlighting that sometimes skipping on a overly complex site, it may seem like you're missing an opportunity, but in reality, it may actually save you and your business time and money, because remember, that time that you spent pursuing that challenging site with a lot of those exceptions may actually cost you several sales of what we would call a conventional or more streamlined design or system. So it's really an opportunity cost. I'd like to jump over to equipment selection for a moment, just give you kind of a quick overview or perspective on that. We find that a lot of times different installation companies forget to include labor and time as part of their metrics. So obviously a couple of pennies difference for the equipment is relevant, but if an extra penny or two on one given racking system or inverter and electronics system, that might save you labor it might allow you to do a one-day installation where a different set of equipment might cost you additional time on a job site, though initially it is cheaper itself. So just kind of shooting down the list. So obviously higher end equipment will meet given test standards. It will meet Sunrun and our third-party standards. You'll have reduced repairs. And if you have happier or better looking installation, you'll get better referrals and actually increase safety for the system and those installing it, and even the homeowner as well. So I guess I'll just jump right into the individual items. I come from a few years ago, I worked at a module manufacturer for quite some time, and we definitely had some of the industry leading quality. And the interesting thing is we actually manufactured both monocrystalline and poly or multi-crystal cells. And I'm actually kind of curious, maybe towards the end, if anybody here has a strong opinion on which one is best, I'd certainly be interested in hearing from you. But the way I'd really shape this is, simply put, it's just a question of the manufacturer preference. Whether you go mono or poly or multi-crystal, I'd actually argue it really doesn't matter. What I do think is more important is the overall company or product standards, and the way that they warranty and stand behind their product. And obviously that all affects the price. And last, the major component that really is impacted by the different materials or manufacturing methods is typically the actual product efficiency. I'd be really curious to hear how many of you are using some of these new high-end, highly efficient products. Lately, I know that SunPower has a couple other people, I'd say, either nipping at their heels or even possibly taking the lead if you look at LG and some of the other products. Now, obviously, there's a cost premium, so that's kind of that doesn't always get perfectly justified. But really, I encourage people to get a high-quality product that's going to last, has a middle to high-end efficiency. And what that's going to do is really deliver you a high kilowatt hour per kilowatt on a per square foot basis, but at a given effective price. Because if you think about, if you spend too much, you could have bought additional solar modules and covered more square footage, at the same or lesser price, and actually in the end had a higher performance. So right now, I tend to think that there's just a few solar module quality leaders, and I'll maybe not name names just at the moment. We'll talk about it later if people are interested. For solar inverters, this is one that I definitely get some strong opinions on. I'll typically ask a given partner, what inverter to use, and a lot of inverters, a lot of partners will say, oh, I use inverter A. Maybe I just use N-phase microinverters, or I just use SolarEdge. And I'd argue that that's actually kind of a mistake. Really what you should do is use the appropriate inverter for the given job site. So I would recommend a given partner has maybe a higher cost but higher capability inverter system, whether that's N-phase or SolarEdge. That will allow you to increase your power output or harvest on a given job site that has a lot of challenges to overcome. Maybe that's a lot of shade, maybe it's different shaped roof, different elements, hips, valleys, and other things that make it difficult to put in a simple or straight array. And then for those job sites where you have a broader, wider open roof, well, you really should go with a string, or sometimes they call it a central inverter. You should go with one of those instead when you can, because they tend to deliver a better production per cost value, and that might allow you to get the sale, or even allow you to put some more solar modules on that roof for the given same price. So really the answer about which inverter is best, it really just depends on the job site. That's really the most appropriate way to look at it. I'd be excited to hear again from anybody that has a different opinion on what inverter is the best one to use. Racking certainly has come a long way recently. We just a few years ago, we used to test an individual item, the attachment, the hook, the piece of rail, and they're all different components that you had to cobble together. But most recently, we've switched to the UL 2703 standard being the lead method for reviewing racking systems. And with that in mind, I really tend to look at systems that have the overall systems approach better managed as the only real choices out there. So I guess I don't want to go too far into the details on this just yet, but all racking systems typically have 10-year or longer warranties. They should install quickly and be able to be sealed and flashed effectively on the given roof type. I think they should be at a fair and effective price. And when we talk about efficiency, I think we should really be thinking about installation labor efficiency. You should be looking at a racking system that installs with fewer tools, fewer parts, and it helps save you costs, again, from a labor point of view. So just a quick review on the UL 2703 standard. It used to be that you tested your racking components individually to different UL standards. A ground lug would meet XYZ standard, the rail piece would meet a load standard, and now 2703 has changed it to a complete system. So it actually makes sure that it has the ability to resist mechanical loads, that's downforce, pull-out loads. It now includes bonding and grounding. Typically you'd call that your EGC path. And then also fire resistance to minimum ensure that when these different systems are tested with given solar modules, they do not contribute to a fire on a given job site. They can get damaged themselves, but they should not make a fire worse or catch fire themselves in a very detrimental way. So there's a few other items that really aren't part of UL 2703. I kind of say, what else is there? Well, there's just a few other items that some companies manage better than others. So one item would be cable management, right? So here's I guess an example of a disaster of wire management, or maybe just none at all. And maybe I'll show you kind of a brand or a product that has a few solutions as part of it. So a good racking system has a well thought out cable management system. In this case, I've got an image of a snap and rack. I believe that's the S100 series. And they've got the cable clips snapping and holding the wires either in the top or in the sides of the rail. And then they also utilize cable clamps. And you can see that they have as well a snap and rack junction box that is easy to mount and goes in quickly and should really hold up for many years. And the other thing, in addition to cables, is the related conduit management as well. So to me, a effective racking system must be UL 2703 rate listed and tested, and it should also include a strong emphasis on the appropriate cable management and conduit as well. I'd be curious if anybody out there is using any racking hardware that is not UL 2703, meaning they're still cobbling together individual parts and pieces. Now, I fully recognize that your local inspector may not specifically require that, but I'd be curious why you'd be using that system just for your own operation, what the benefits are. And the one last detail is really that some of the best systems actually use only one or two tools. So they've made it just so much easier to install than just a few years ago. I wanted to give a quick shout out. It looks like Snap and Rack has finally begun shipping and has released a updated version of their railless hardware. The reason this one's interesting to me, it's actually the railless attachments and those things, those are nice. On the bottom there you see the flash track. Next to that is the A mount, which holds the lower end of the solar modules. Kind of the third one over on the bottom is the B mount, and then finally the C link. That's what links the individual modules together. Now I think that railless hardware is great, But to me, what really makes the Snap and Rack system stand out is they've also thought of everything else. They've got this wire saver attachment, the wire clip, a ground lug, and the module level power optimizer attachment. So my point being, when you look at different railless systems, a lot of them have figured out the mechanical attachments, but they haven't figured out everything else. So make sure if you get into railless hardware that you look into a solution that has thought about cable management, how to mount the optimizers or microinverters, and also the junction boxes as well. It's not hard to see on this image, but they've even got a specialized junction box that fits underneath your railless solar array. So I think that the railless solar will just continue to take more and more market share. And basically what I've keep on hearing and seeing myself is that they typically install a little bit quicker than your standard rail systems, and in the majority of cases they actually cost less when you look at the total cost of the parts and pieces. There's generally a bit less aluminum used, so hopefully it really should cost less. And one thing that I've seen personally as well is due to the nature of the way that they link together and kind of have the clamps and really interesting, the clamps and attachments in interesting places, is they typically allow for some more flexibility in terms of installation and module layout. So I hope to see more and more railless racking system improvements and more systems installed. And the one other item as well from a lot of manufacturers is what I just typically call your reduced cost options. They recently unveiled the Ultra Rail system, and basically that's a simplified rail extrusion that for areas that have standard, or let's say kind of limited loads, maybe of not your gale force or high snow loads, these types of racking systems are really efficient and effective. If you get to see this Ultra Rail system in action, it actually just snaps into the attachments, and they've been able to redesign the splice that goes between the rails to be a snap in with a single bolt. So you save money on the actual equipment racking itself, and the labor has been sped up as well. And if you ask me, this kind of completes the solar system cost reduction trifecta. And what I mean by that is solar modules have certainly come down quite a bit in price over the last few years. Inverters have certainly plummeted a bit, especially if you've jumped over to some of the newer brands or the newer offerings. And then finally, the racking systems have taken a bit of a dive recently in cost as well. And from here out, I'm not really sure what other cost reductions there'll be. Perhaps it'll be the labor and the planning from the actual installation crews. That seems to be kind of the last step in terms of reducing installation costs. Oh, one more item I wanted to call out just because it's pretty neat. Snap and Rack recently updated and offers a tile replacement. They've got an S tile variant, a W format, and also a flat tile option. Now these systems are great because you no longer spend time cutting or drilling into your clay, concrete, or other tile materials. You simply remove those tiles and set them aside as spares, so that while you're climbing on the roof, if you happen to damage a tile or two, no big deal, you've now got a spare to sub in. So these are pretty compelling, and I'm hearing a lot of positive feedback, a lot of really happy customers that are installing tile replacement systems as opposed to doing the systems that require their modification. And in fact, with tile hooks, you still typically have to grind the underside of your concrete or other tiles. So these should really be a real benefit to most sites. Well, and I guess the next item is really just balance of systems. Right now, there's a few products that I think really take the lead or are the best equipment. The Snap and Rack junction boxes are hard to beat. In terms of flashings, I don't know that there's a whole lot there, but as Sunrun, we've really learned our lesson that those rubber boot-based products, typically you call them an OD flashing, those tend to be more problematic. They get stretched or damaged or torn or even just installed incorrectly. So we typically recommend you avoid flashings that the upper portion is made of rubber. We want typically an all metal solution. Now, if it's perfectly fine if you put a storm collar or rain collar over that pipe penetration or the standoff penetration, that's great. But that's really just a quick insight from us. For your flat or very low slope roofs, those Kemlink products are fantastic. Wire splices. Sunrun's unique that we actually require wet rated wire splices if it's not a prefab solution. Now, what I meant by that is if you happen to use a Solidec or a snap and rack junction box that comes with a wiring kit, those are intended for solar splices. So we would typically think that we typically believe that they are corrosion or rust resistant. If it's something that the installer supplies themselves, we want to see wet rated wire nuts or wet rated lugs, something like that. So we want those to last. Maybe we'll take another moment and just jump ahead and talk about the switchgear, DC disconnects, and other items. Just a quick shout out here is if you end up needing a DC disconnect in kind of an odd location, maybe a ground mount battery system or something through where there's a fence or a wall in the way, we found that IMO offers some pretty low cost and very compact DC disconnects, so you might want to check those out. And if you can think of any questions or recommendations on BOS equipment, I always love to talk shop about those things. So here's an example of your Kemlink M kerb system. And I'll just give a quick overview of what's being done here. The hole was driven into the rafter or the purlin up top. They applied the base with a screw, and you'll notice that there's actually a little bit of the Kemlink M1 oozing out of that base. They applied the standoff. You then cover that actual base plate and that standoff with M1 itself. It's to act as a primer because the M1 product is actually very sticky. It's very much a high strength adhesive product with just a little bit of flexibility. So then you take that M1 and you apply it to the underside of the kerb, and it's not really easy to see until the very bottom picture there, but you also put M1 on the edges of that kerb so that your filler material doesn't leak or pour out. So you press your kerb down very tightly to the roof, you tool around a nice smooth edge, and then finally you fill it with the Kemlink pourable filler. Now that filler product is very flexible and very stable for the long term, but it's actually just not very adhesive or very sticky. And so that's the reason that you actually did that priming before is if it was just the one part filler, it could actually pull off of the aluminum or other materials that might have a little residual oil on them. So by putting the M1 sealant or adhesive on there first, that pourable fill will bond to that more aggressively, and as the array and pipe moves around over time, it will withstand it and maintain a proper seal. So this will be a very effective installation for years to come. And again, in this case, this is just like a tilt-up example. This would apply to conduit passing through a roof and other solutions. And AE carries this exact product and solution. It's very effective. So let's jump over to kind of your installation workday. Now, it's now the industry standard, and Sunrun has in fact, if your installation is not one day, we're going to basically say, hey, crew, or hey, branch, what's going on? Why aren't you installing in one day? We've actually even got some crews in some markets that will install 2 PV systems in one day. So really, I'm hoping that most of you are shooting for the one-day installation. Customers love it. It's usually good for your bottom line, and you don't waste a lot of time on on your trucks driving back and forth, that sort of thing. So the way that you really accomplish that is by good design initially, having the right equipment and processes, and really doing everything you can to set yourself up for success. Now, just a quick comment here. I do occasionally talk to companies that are overly obsessed with getting that one-day installation, meaning that they'll throw 9 or 10 people at a given job site. Well, in that case, if it's a smaller site, that could still be a waste of money. So you want to make sure that you're really thinking about your man hours per kilowatt. So the example I kind of list here is a 9-person crew doing a 5K system in one day. That's actually worse than a 3-person crew taking 2 days to install that same system. So just make sure that you keep the right balance in mind. And so what we really recommend that you do is as much planning as possible beforehand, and really good communication with the homeowner, so that way they're there and ready for you to start on time. One of the simplest things that I see in the field is just effectively talking to your crew. So sometimes showing them on your plan set or even a scrap piece of paper what you have in mind with your installation team. And something that really helps to avoid people kind of standing aside and looking, scratching their heads and being confused is really to just specify actual goals. So I listed a few examples here. So by your 10 o'clock break, all your penetrations should be in. By before lunch, the racking should be up and leveled, and then we should be laying glass and testing the system by 3 o'clock. So specifying those goals really helps to keep people on their toes and working effectively. And in different cases, depending on your hardware, I find that some of the most effective installation crews and teams out there, they're actually able to do much of the more tedious items right on the ground. So that means in the warehouse, they'll actually pull up the modules and slap in a bunch of those wireframe clips on the side of the modules and get the cables so that just barely a couple inches of wire can kind of be pulled off of it. And they'll even prefab the junction boxes and the sub panels. So whether or not you do that wire management on the, on the driveway as you pass the modules up or in your warehouse, that's up to you. But we really find that that's a huge time saver. And also it's really effective in climates where it gets really hot and kind of maybe too sunny to do all that and by 2 or 3 o'clock. So another concept is to just kind of keep in mind, like, let's work like an assembly line. So you'll have one person kind of taking the lead, they'll drill and apply sealant, and you'll have another person following them with the L-feet, standoffs, flashings, the rest of the attachment hardware. And what you can do with this kind of assembly line concept is anytime there's a slower step, you can either have more people do that process, or you can immediately have the person following them jump to another task until the person kind of in the lead has got ahead or caught up again. So one other area is we typically recommend installing the equipment kind of outside of the house, kind of in the exposed or easy to access areas. We find that it's easier to do the initial installation, and it helps as well in the future if any service or repairs are required. And the truth is, in garages, sometimes you'll find that customers will find that inverter or different equipment, it's just a great place to put their junk on top of. And you want to minimize that as well, because the equipment has ventilation needs as well. So typically we could try to keep our gear outside whenever possible. I'm certainly curious to hear how many people here are installing battery systems, and I've been really impressed to see that Sunrun has been selling and installing a whole lot more batteries than I expected at this time. They're really beginning to take a significant market share for us. And what I wanted to do is maybe offer just a couple of insider tips. And we find that when you install these systems, in this case, I'm referring to the Sunrun, to the SolarEdge storage system. And there's some commissioning steps that can really take some time. So if you want to be a really professional team, what you want to do is get the AC power connected and on to that inverter as soon as possible. That way you can get those slightly longer or more tedious steps running. So you can get the firmware going, you can get some of the programming, the activation, and those details. And while you have those steps running, you then step aside and start working on the backup or the protected load circuits. And then if you jet back over to the inverter and you can start the pairing process, again, you step aside and you pull over the refrigerator circuit and other things. So you just want to think about the most effective way to keep on working, keep installation going, so that you're not staring at a screen that's counting up 1%, 2%, 40%, 50%. So the point is to get that inverter connected, get the commissioning processes going, and it's actually really nice if you can get the battery charging as well before you finish for the day. That's a way to ensure that the system can stay in the off or standby position for quite a few weeks without causing issues to the battery or related hardware. Again, if anybody here is doing battery systems, I'd be really curious if you have any insights or techniques. We typically want our batteries charged to at least 50% before we turn them off for a standby for a couple of weeks, awaiting the local inspector utility inspection as well. That's our way of ensuring that we don't have equipment that needs to be reviewed or repaired. So jumping over to the kind of the last major component is really installation quality. I'm sure everybody here knows that installation quality is obviously incredibly important. It affects performance, safety. It makes your team proud of their work. Nobody likes to go back and repair things, but I guess it's kind of buried in here. But if you do good quality work, it's really good for the entire industry, not just your company. It actually makes all of our solar companies look better, and ideally it'll help promote additional solar sales and installation through referrals. So I really can't stress how important installation quality is. And so what Sunrun recommends that you do is check your quality constantly as you work. Maybe have kind of have several people on your crew that are reviewing the installation quality. And what we mean here about checking while you work, it's not just kind of thinking about what you're doing, but it's establishing some sort of installation quality concept or checklist. Because I know myself and others, we kind of get into autopilot, and as we work, you might get too focused on what you're doing to realize that a cable or other item just fell loose or sagging from above. So we really recommend that you use a documented quality system, and I'll give you a quick example of that. And one quick detail I just wanted to throw out. Obviously, having high installation quality matters, meaning that you'll pick on people when they make a mistake or give them feedback is the best way to put it. But I also recommend when you have different installation crews you work with, please give the ones who do good quality, give them a high five or acknowledgement as well. Don't just pick on the mistakes. So Sunrun typically uses we offer a self-assessment tool here. I'll make that available to anybody that wants it. And all this does is it's just a way to quickly and easily review your installation as you go or afterwards to make sure that the roof was in good shape, the racking went in correctly, the roof penetrations are flashed and sealed, your cable management met the given requirements, your J-box is installed right, the inverter and the rest of the equipment went together appropriately, and finally that you've actually made sure the system's tested and ready for standby until it's ready to operate. So here's just another close-up detail of the self-assessment. And we even call out a bunch of NEC items here, as well as things that we know Sunrun looks for and local inspectors. So here's a quick example. Conduit's well supported, routed properly, and fittings are rated for the environment. So that's an easy item, what you would do. is initial it to the right in that kind of greenish box. Just put your initials. In my case, it's DH. So that means DH checked out that item. And you keep on going down the list. Excuse me, that was number 8. But the whole point is that way you can have an accountable, quick quality review process. Here's the bottom half of that self-assessment document. I'll jump over to number 15. AC disconnect is appropriate for the environment. It's wired correctly, grounded, and it must be a blade style unit. So again, that's just to ensure it's NEC compliant and meets some Sunrun's special specifications as well. And I just wanted to give a few examples here. I'm not going to read that whole thing, but this quick self-assessment will really improve your odds of acing local inspection and pleasing a Sunrun auditor as well if we were to take a look at your job. With that, that's really the end. I really appreciate everybody taking the time with me this morning. Does anybody have any questions or other items they wanted to review?
Thank you, Danny. So let's see, we do have a first question here. It's kind of just really a statement, and this kind of goes back to products and availability, and it has to do with the LG batteries being unavailable. They've been waiting months. So Paul, I will go ahead and address that with our products manager here, and we can kind of reach out to you in regards to that. And I'll just scroll through here and see if there's any other questions.
Is Paul there was asking about the batteries, when he can get them and install them? Is his main concern?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty confident that battery installations are just getting more and more popular all around the world. So I was just recently in Puerto Rico, and every single system there has batteries, and in Hawaii they all do. So there's just some markets right now that are going gangbusters for batteries. So everything I can see looks like the manufacturers are just ramping up production as fast as they can.
That absolutely makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping it gets better and better.
All right, well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. So again, I want to thank you, Danny. And that concludes the question and answer portion of our webinar. Thank you for joining us for the presentation. And join us next Friday, August 10th for our next webinar in our webinar series, New Module Technologies. Check out our website for more training opportunities with AEE Solar. Have a great weekend, and as always, thank you for doing business with AEE Solar.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Danny.